to the Committee of the Whole meeting of the Town Council, February the 4th, 2019 at 9 a.m. in Council Chambers. So is there any introduction of late items? Nothing. So could we have a motion, please, to accept the Committee of the Whole agenda? Thank you. Councillor King, Councillor Bennett. Thank you. All in favor? Okay.
I'm in favor.
Thank you. And the first item on our agenda today is a delegation of the proposed National Park Reserve in South Okanagan, Similkameen. And we have a presentation from our project manager for Parks Canada, Sarah Boyle, and Isaac, who's writing down some notes. And Isaac is the secretary, is he?
He's outreach and he's outreach, public outreach.
Public outreach. Thank you. Welcome to both of you, and welcome to all of the people who are here to listen to this presentation. And I'd just like to say 4 of us are here on council, and Councillor Rhodes is on the phone. So all of us are present to listen to this.
Okay.
Welcome, Sarah. Thank you for coming.
Thank you very much for everyone's time. So my name is Sarah Boyle. I am a project manager for Parks Canada agency, and I'm here as a part of the official public consultation portion for the proposed National Park Reserve to go over some of the overview of the consultation package. A large part of this is based on former consultations that have happened on this topic. And a lot of what you will see now is based on response from those previous consultations that have occurred.
You'll have to probably speak into the microphone.
In the mic a bit more? Okay.
Yeah, good.
Okay. That's better. So this is the opportunity as members of the local community to have your say. And so we'd really like to encourage folks to participate in the process and provide constructive criticism, concerns, ideas, because this is the time and the place for that. So next slide. So the 3 goals for the public consultation are to share up-to-date information. There has been, I do believe, 4 to 5 other versions of consultation that have occurred since 2003. These have changed and evolved over time based on feedback from the public. And we really want to make sure that people are using up-to-date information to base their concerns and their questions on. We'll be reviewing key aspects of, part of this presentation, we'll be reviewing key aspects of the proposed National Park Reserve, and we'll be addressing past issues and concerns as well as inviting new questions. Online since early December, we have had this process online at Let's Talk South Okanagan Similkameen. Hard copies of the consultation package have been made available at most municipal offices as well as libraries, and we'll be taking out an ad in local papers to advertise as such. And I do have electronic copies that I've been forwarding to stakeholder groups as well. So next slide, please. So the objectives and goals of the National Park Reserve really primarily are ecological. We are looking to protect the diversity and biodiversity and vegetation associated with this landscape. This is one of the most biologically diverse areas in Canada. It's one of the most endangered ecosystems in Canada. The semi-arid shrub steppe ecosystem supports an incredible vast diversity of plants and animal species. Really, we would also like to maintain the ecological integrity, watershed protection associated with this, wildlife habitat and plant species, and we know that it's not pristine, and a number of restoration activities will also need to take place. And really, we want to also help provide quality, authentic visitor experiences for locals and the public to enjoy this area as well, that are respectful of how the current land is being accessed. Next slide. So key aspects of land management. So for those of you that have a hard copy, this would be on page 6. So really what we wanted to go over is governance in a national park reserve, and what does that mean? So a national park reserve versus a national park. A national park reserve allows for the recognition of Aboriginal rights and title. So that's the difference between a national park and national park reserve. And so the National Park Reserve allows for traditional practices by Indigenous peoples on the landscape in a cooperative, respectful co-management system that is based on respect and partnership as well as cooperation. There's been a lot of questions from local communities on how cooperative management within a national park would work. Indigenous relations with the lands would always remain as they have, and as would locals and visitors also be able to access and continue to access the land as they have. The large majority of more recent national parks are cooperatively managed, and those are negotiated separately on a unique to each park. But the surrounding communities can still continue to access and use the places and the parks that they love, and as these parks become cooperatively managed with the local Indigenous governments as well. So we are quite different. A national park reserve is I have heard concerns that or there's some mixing of an interpretation of an Indian reserve versus a national park reserve. Those are very different components. They're different jurisdictions. They're managed very differently through different levels of federal government. And I've also heard talk about Indigenous protected areas or territorial parks. Those types of parks are usually negotiated between the province and a local First Nation, or a territory and a local First Nation. And Parks Canada doesn't typically sit at the table for Indigenous protected conservation areas or to territorial parks. So next I wanted to talk about the working boundary in private lands. Really, when we refer to the park as a working boundary, this is a term that's used to describe the proposed area for the national park reserves. It's just a line that represents area within the boundary. The line on the map is what Parks Canada proposes to achieve at some point in time. It will take a number of years to realize that. Privately owned lands, now this is very important, privately owned lands will remain under the title of private landowners, and a national park reserve designation would not apply to private lands. The regional district would remain as the administrator of bylaws on privately owned lands. The only time where private lands may be considered as a national park reserve at some point in the future would be on a willing seller, willing buyer basis. Moving on to the next point, so the next slide. So willing seller, willing buyer. So no lands will be expropriated as a part of this proposed national park reserve establishment, except on a willing seller, willing buying basis. So within the Canada National Parks Act, as of the early 2000s, Parks Canada can actually not appropriate or expropriate any lands to expand or establish a national parks reserve. It has to only be through willing seller, willing buyer. And based on if there was a willing seller, they would approach Parks Canada. Parks Canada would also have to be a willing buyer, and then a negotiation would occur based on a property appraisals, and any future negotiations would be based on agreement with the landowner. So that's something that wanted to make sure is very clear. So the next slide, please. Road access. So we've heard a lot of questions and concerns about road access and private autonomy over private lands, both within and adjacent to the park boundary. So we have sent out letters and information packages to private landowners within the park boundary to let them know to let them know that Parks Canada has no jurisdiction over how privately owned land is managed. The property remains the property of that landowner. It will remain under the jurisdiction of the current government or provincial statutes or regional district. And we have no jurisdiction over private property, how it's managed. And in order for guests or family or friends or patrons to access the property, there will not be the need to pay toll fees or road fees or go through a gate or anything to that extent. And so that's something that we welcome the opportunity to work with private landowners towards common objectives, and would commit to support being a good neighbor. So the next slide is ranching and grazing. So in previous versions, when this parks had talked about phasing out cattle and ranging and ranching, and we heard loud and clear from the public and from members of the ranching industry as well as the government that that wasn't an option. So part of being invited back to the table by the province and as well as the Okanagan Nation Alliance is that long-term relationships with ranchers will be critical to the future success of the National Park Reserve. And although commercial livestock raising is not typically an allowable activity within the National Park Reserve, Parks Canada is committed to working with ranching families to provide certainty and stability. And continuing as they're operating today. We're working right now to develop a similar regulatory framework, and we will be working with the Grazing and Ranching Stockmen's Association on a go-forward basis to do that. The next, I'd like to talk about the Agriculture Land Reserve, and I'd like to flip to the map, if that's okay, the ALR map, just so that we can put it in context. So what we've done, if it's on page 13, if you have a hard copy, and we'll put it up on the screen. So this map that you see up here is we've taken the overlays from the province on ALR lands and put it in conjunction with the proposed national park boundary to really put into context what the ALR lands look like that would be encompassed in the proposed National Park Reserve. So I'm just going to hold this up so you can see a copy of it right now. Because the
Can I interrupt? Why don't we all have one of these?
Oh, please help yourself. These are for available for you. Yeah, taking. Yeah. So what you'll see here is in the green lands outside of the national park boundary represent agriculture land reserve lands. Within the park boundary, we've categorized that into two branches. So one is privately owned ALR lands. The other is Crown-owned ALR lands. So you'll see that the yellow lands represent 80% of ALR lands within the proposed park boundary, and those are privately owned. So the majority of agriculture land reserve lands within the park boundary are privately owned. You'll see at the very bottom there's a green hash mark area, and that currently is the area which is in the South Okanagan Grasslands Park. And those are the areas that are agriculture lands that are provincially owned. So currently, the extent of agriculture on those lands is grazing. There's no additional agriculture use for those lands other than allowing cattle to graze. So this puts into context the extent of impact to agriculture land reserve. So moving back to the presentation. So next slide, please. So again, one of the main reasons and impetuses for this national park reserve proposal is environment, ecology, and species at risk. The interior shrub steppe ecosystem found in the interior of BC, including the South Okanagan, Similkameen, is recognized as one of the country's most rarest and endangered natural ecosystems. And this is really the only occurrence of this ecosystem in Canada, and they form the northern tip of the North American's Great Basin Desert. So by establishing this National Park Reserve, we're looking to protect and represent and restore this rare and endangered ecosystem and support the recovery of species at risk, but as well protect habitat for a substantial number of other species, and as well as look at protection of watershed as well. So that's, everybody can agree that this area is pretty spectacular. I don't think that's... So next slide, please. So fire management, we know that this area is a fire-driven ecosystem. Fire remains a very large issue of concern for the surrounding communities. You've got a large amount of infrastructure, towns, communities, agriculture lands, and roads. We recognize that a collaborative approach to fire management would be required and hope to add to the capacity really to add to that capacity to help address and prevent catastrophic wildfire within the area. So we know that we will need to work with the provincial fire centers, as well as work with the local volunteer fire departments, as well as the local First Nations traditional burn practitioners. Parks is bringing to the table 125 years of fire management experience and 30 years of prescribed fire management in order to help prevent catastrophic wildfire. And if we have time at the end, I would like to show a quick 3-minute video just demonstrating how in the town of Waskesiu, prescribed burning has been used to help prevent, fire smarting, essentially, to help protect that town. So we'll see how much time we have at the end. Next slide, please. So Visitation and Law Enforcement, if you do have a hard copy, this is on page 8 of your hard copy. So we've updated a lot of our socioeconomic, or some of our key aspects of socioeconomic components, and one of those that we wanted to really focus on was visitation. We know in earlier versions, I think in 2005, there was not a great social science, comparison with what visitation would be in this area. They took an existing park called Pac Rim and just said, this park would probably have the similar visitation to Pacific Rim National Park, and it wasn't really based on any science or existing information. Those numbers were updated in 2008, but this 300,000 seemed to really stick with the area, so we'd like to correct that. So what we've done, and all of our references are at the bottom, they're very small, but we do have all of our sources, information. So we've taken best available information. Most of that is from Destination BC 2017 data, or Stats BC, or we've also taken visitation data from 5 local provincial parks in the area, including Manning Park, and we've taken data from 10 different national parks or national park reserves that have similar characteristics to the proposed national park in the South Okanagan Similkameen. And what we found from there, as well as taking the current number of visitations to the region. So in the north, the central, and the South Okanagan Similkameen, there's 8.4 million visitors annually. There was no information we could find on what the visitation was specifically for the South Okanagan Similkameen. So the room revenues by tourism regions was used as a proxy, and there was a calculation that current visitation to this area is approximately 375,000 people. So that's the current visitation that you have coming to this area. So using all of the information that I've mentioned, there is a 5-year projection on what visitation might look like for a national park reserve. So annually, there's expected to between 73,000 to 77,000 visitors. Further breaking that down, 56% of those is accounted to local use. So anticipating that locals will be using and accessing this area as they always have, and is currently implicated. One of the national parks that we've included that is a similar characteristic is Riding Mountain in Manitoba, and they have a very high component of local use. 86 to 90% of their use is from local use. Then moving to the remaining 44%, so around 32,000, is accounted to tourism. Breaking that further down, the majority of that number is folks who are already in the area, they're already visiting for other reasons. So they're here to take in the wine tours, or recreate, or hike, or be on the lake. And really only a very moderate amount of extra visitation is anticipated as a part of the National Park Reserve. So between years 1 and 5, the anticipation is that there would be 2,000 to 4,000 extra visitors per year. So it's very moderate. It's based on that there really wouldn't be a lot of new infrastructure or new visitation programs in the first 5 years. So there would be modest growth in the first 5 5 years really are for planning and development of park infrastructure and visitor services. That allows for visitation to be planned and increased sustainably but strategically over time, so that you're not looking at carrying capacity issues. And so that is something that I think is very important, and what we've heard as a big concern in this area is that you don't want this massive influx of tourism that also causes issues with the town infrastructure. We've also heard concerns over law enforcement. I'll talk about that quickly. Our law enforcement officers in national parks do keep a very meticulous record of an incident, and an incident can be anything from a dog off leash to a camping infraction to having to involve the RCMP for a criminal code infraction. But the number of those incidents where you involve RCMP is quite small. So while a park of the similar size to what's proposed with South Okanagan, the number of incidents per year can range anywhere from 19 to 81, so the average is 55. Approximately 6% of those result in needing to involve the RCMP, so that's between 1 to 4 incidents per year. And conversely, the RCMP can also refer incidents back to our law enforcement folks as well. So there is a lot of collaboration between park wardens and the local RCMP, and there's a relatively low amount of incidences that get referred to the RCMP. We've heard also concerns about property values, and really, what we found is that some studies show that there can be up to a 20% premium value in close to a national park or park reserve, but other studies show that there was no impact or a negative impact. There's so many other parameters and characteristics that influence real estate prices, but when we talked to the South Okanagan Real Estate Board, really they said the number one determining factor in terms of premiums is that Lakeview properties are the only ones that have an identifiable premium in the region. So next slide, please. So these are allowable activities that are typically allowed in a national park or national park reserve. They're not comprehensive, but it gives a good idea of what is encouraged in the national park. So everything from fishing, which I have heard that some folks have said there's no fishing in national parks. Fishing is allowed in national parks, as is horseback riding. Mountain biking in designated areas, hiking, trail running, photography, camping, both front country and back country, non-motorized hang gliding and paragliding, stargazing, and because we would be allowing grazing and working with ranchers on grazing on the landscape, off-road vehicle use for operational purposes would need to happen, and that still allow folks to access their cattle quickly or bring in supplies for fence repairs. Next slide, please. So prohibited, these are activities that are typically prohibited in a national park or national park reserve. And so recreational off-roading vehicle use for recreational purposes is not allowed. Typically hunting and trapping, except firewood collection, parachuting or base jumping, mushroom picking or drone use. There are circumstances where one or all of these might need to be employed, and the avenue to do that is by working with the superintendent to get a permit and permission. So for example, if there's hyperabundant wildlife that needs to be addressed, there would be a plan working with the local community to look at addressing any unsustainable increases in ungulate management. But that has to be planned and through a permitting system with the superintendent. Next slide, please. So hunting on private lands, as we indicated, there's quite a few private lands that are encompassed within this proposed boundary. As I mentioned before, the federal government has no jurisdiction on property rights on privately owned land. So hunting on private lands would remain subject to the British Columbia Wildlife Act. We would need to work with private landowners to ensure that we have some sort of system to ensure that legally harvested animals, were indicated as such, and they could be transported through the National Park Reserve, but that's certainly not insurmountable. And transport of firearms is regulated by the Firearms Act. storage, transportation, and handling of firearms by individual regulations. When folks get their possession and acquisition license, they get trained on that and sign that they will adhere to those transportation of firearms. And so essentially, it's status quo. Firearms must be unloaded and disabled and securely encased when they're being transported. So the next slide, please. There's a number of tenures in the proposed boundary, including a high number of mineral tenures, forestry, hunting, and guiding, and helicopter use. And so, we're really not at the point where we're in negotiations. We're in the planning phases. If this national park proposal, in the high likelihood that this National Park Reserve proposal does go ahead, we would then go into more detailed negotiations and planning. But we are in contact and will be in contact with tenure holders who have a variety of different tenures on the land. So next slide, please. So this is the last slide, really. So really, we're looking to work and share this inspiring landscape with local residents, British Columbians, and international visitors. Part of the mandate Parks Canada has is to preserve ecological integrity, but also to present and educate on commemorative and natural heritage and cultural heritage, and do that to teach people about the past and the history here as well, and to do that for present and future generations. So really, we will need to collaborate as planning progresses with local chambers of commerce, tourism associations, historical organizations, First Nations, to promote authentic experiences on the land that respect the conservation of both ecology and culture. So next slide, please. So yeah, thank you for your time and attention. My contact information is on the slide right there. I've got it's also I've got some business cards here, and there's information if anyone wants to pick anything up.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I believe we have a couple of minutes if you'd like to show. You said you had a video on fire.
Yeah.
Is it available? I think it might be good because that was one of the questions that people were concerned about.
Okay.
There's no fire practice in the national parks, and we want to
Yeah,
straighten.
no, there very much is fire practice, particularly in areas like this that have a high frequency for a forest fire frequency interval, and this park would likely qualify for their own fire management team as well as fire equipment and response cache. So this is an example of a video, not saying that it would be applicable here because fire programs are very much tailored to the circumstances of the local area and the climate of the local region, but this is an example of how Parks Canada has worked with the town to provide fire protection. It was just...
Just a big it's okay.
Where to go? That one, yes. Okay. So this video is an example based in outside of Prince Albert in Saskatchewan.
It has been said that beauty will rise from the ashes. But that beauty will not come without the heat of the fire. From a fire that rages, new life will be created. Welcome to the southern edge of Saskatchewan's boreal forest, in the heart of Prince Albert National Park. Waskesiu is nestled along the sandy shoreline of Waskesiu Lake. This central Saskatchewan community is one of 5 national park town sites managed exclusively by Parks Canada. Up to 10,000 visitors can be found camping, boating, and leisurely exploring the village's shops and cafes on a hot summer day. But what about the threat of wildfire? In 2001 and 2002, the Waskesiu Community Fuel Break was created to provide the town with a line of defense against wildfire. The project involves selective thinning of approximately 300 hectares of forest. It is in the days after snow and ice have melted, leaving the forest floor bone dry, and before summer greenery has grown in, that wildfires are often most volatile. Each spring, Parks Canada fire personnel watch and wait for that narrow window of opportunity before the leaves open, but when the frost is still in the ground, to burn off dead grass and other down vegetation using handheld drip torches and a terra torch. Wetlands, trails, and roadways act as guard lines that help regulate the low-intensity fire. Wildland firefighters are ready with water pumps and hoses or water packs to put out any spot fires. The prescribed fire takes about a dozen people a half day to complete. As overnight humidity rises, the flames die down and leave traces of smoke that can still be seen the next morning. Within a the area will be transformed to a thick green carpet of grasses and wildflowers frequented by deer and elk. And should a wildfire approach Waskesiu, the band of green will slow a fire's progression, allowing firefighting efforts to be mobilized.
So that's the end of the video. That green corridor area, annually at Christmas time, Waskesiu Park invites the public to harvest Christmas trees from that line because it helps them in their efforts to keep that line maintained. And so it's an example of a permitted activity that typically isn't allowed, but can be compromised.
So, Sarah, thank you very much for this presentation. I remember when the first office opened here in 2003, I think it was, and things have changed quite radically over those 15 years. Many things have been addressed that people were concerned about so long ago, which is why it was kind of shelved for a while. I do know that there are still concerns that people have, partly because last week I saw, I think it was in the Penticton paper, that the helicopter people were quite concerned, and I do know that you're working with them. So I certainly appreciate having things written down and in print, because I think there's been lots of different stories and different ideas and different interpretations in the past, 5 years anyway. So thank you for doing this and for presenting this to us. And these are certainly available. We have them at the front desk all the time for anybody who wants them, and of course they're here. And there is a form here as well that people can fill out and answer, ask questions and comment on things. So
and we'll be using feedback from that report. Part of what Isaac and I are doing is we get to go through all the feedback on that report and develop what we heard that gives a summary. That information will go ultimately to the Environment Minister of both the province and the federal government to make recommendations on what the public wants to see or doesn't want to see.
So can I just ask, before I open it up to everybody, what are kind of the next steps? You're going to take this kind of feedback and you're going to come out with a sort of a second or an updated report?
A report, yes. Yeah.
Okay.
And then that will be used to inform next steps that are taken by the steering committee and ultimately the environment ministers of both the province of British Columbia and the federal environment minister.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.
I'm going to open it up to, just a minute, Council. I'm sure some will have some questions. Councillor King.
I just build on the 10-year holders. Can you give a sample of another park? You say you're going to send them letters, but if I'm that business owner, I feel I'm in a negative already. So do you have a sample of other businesses that are in national parks?
Businesses that are running
like helicopters guiding, things like that?
A lot of so hunting and guiding isn't typically allowed in a national park reserve, so we would need to be working with those folks on what it looks like in terms of the long term. They're phasing out of compensation. In terms of Helicopters, we depend quite heavily on helicopters and develop standing offers with helicopter companies. Our visitor safety staff depend on helicopter companies that are knowledgeable and know how to fly in the mountains. Our ecological staff, which I have been in the past as a wildlife biologist, are very dependent on flying with helicopter pilots who know what they're doing in the mountains. And our fire staff depend very heavily on helicopter use. We typically, during fire season, work with local helicopter companies and on a minimum basis to ensure that we have access to helicopters to do initial response and assessment as soon as there's a report of fire. So those are some just examples off the top of my head, but we need to collaborate with the local communities. Gone are the days where a lot of examples are brought of Banff or Jasper National Park, and those parks were formed over 125 years ago. They're very old models. A lot of the newer parks and national park reserves are completely dependent on collaborating with the local communities, and that would be true here.
Thank you. Councillor Bennett.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just when you talk about Jasper Banff, that's what I hear from a lot of people.
Yeah.
They see Jasper Banff. You're talking 1 to 5 years. When I look at this, I don't see a great big 100,000 acres of one big piece of property because you got a lot of private land.
Yeah.
Different, so it's kind of a reserve around a bunch of different spots.
We call it a mosaic, is what we've been referring to it as.
Yeah. So basically, you're not going to get, like I go to Jasper Banff now, and you hardly can walk down the road, and there's so many people in the corridor.
Yeah.
And right now, between Oliver, Soyuz, and Penticton, it's terrible in the summer already.
Yeah.
So people in their mind see a Jasper Banff, they see the roadway in between there, and they go, oh, do we really want that?
Yeah.
So by what you painted here, it looks a little bit different because it's a mosaic, like you said.
It's a mosaic. It doesn't include a town site. Jasper and Banff both have towns that they're managing as well, so that's a big difference. And they're much larger as well. Like really, this portion of land, there's existing provincial protected areas, but they're quite fragmented. But this is 270 square kilometers within the proposed boundary. That includes the private lands, just because we haven't, about a third of that is composed by private land. So really, there's a opportunity here to work with focused and targeted visitor experience opportunities and address concerns with carrying capacity and too much love on the landscape and people and people not using the area sustainably. So
Thank you.
yeah.
Thank you. Mr. Manko, did you have a question?
Yes. I haven't been able to see a detailed map, but are you able to comment on what is the relationship between our town boundary and the working boundary? Are they going to be coterminous?
Well, there's a map on page, if you have
I know,
okay.
I can see the map, but getting down to the detail, is the national park going to border right on the town boundary?
Well, to comment to that, I think that we need our planners to sit down to look at. We used private land, so Soyuz, Redlands do donate what the current, I believe, official community plan denotes. But that's something that, as we move forward into next steps and more detailed planning, depending on how the public consultation goes, we need to be sitting down with your planners, Don and Gina, to further detail that.
There's crown land that butts up against the town boundary.
Yeah, okay.
So is it going to be encompassing all the crown lands?
Yeah, it'll be encompassing the crown lands that are proposed here, but this is what the consultation process is for. This boundary is just a line. We want feedback as well on this component. So I am meeting with folks from the Azores Wildlife Federation later today, because our boundary also encompasses the fire range. So that's what we're also looking for, is to get feedback on what areas we might need to excise as well, or negotiate on how to move forward and complete.
Okay.
Good, thank you. Did our planners have any concerns? No, you're okay?
Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Rhodes, you okay? Did you have any questions?
No, I'm fine, Mayor McCartoff. I was able to see Sarah's presentation at the regional district some time ago. The only question I had to ask, Mr. Romanko just asked it, so no, I'm good, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So I think we're good. Thank you very much for taking the time to come down here. We are happy to have updates and have you come back anytime that you feel that we need an update on things. And thank you for meeting with all of the special interest groups as well and answering their questions.
Okay.
And we look forward to working with you in the future.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to present.
Thank you. Okay, so our next report is from Ms. Van Vienen, and that would be on the Delegation of Authority bylaw.
Thank you. The Community Charter provides the authority to Council to delegate some of its powers, duties, and functions under Section 154. The town currently does not have a Delegation of Authority bylaw. This has resulted in taking more time to deal with simple issues as they require the authority of Council. As examples, funding applications that are being applied for by the town and do not require a Council resolution currently need Council authority in order for the town signatories to sign. Delegation of Authority Bylaw number 1292-2019 addresses some items that could be completed in a more timely fashion rather than awaiting a council meeting by delegating the authority to do so to the mayor, CAO, or other designate, such as letters of support for nonprofit organizations, action against employees other than officers, expending funds over $30,000 for equipment or services that fall within the budgeted amount, land title and right-of-way agreements, water and sewer agreements, license of occupation agreements, for example, Wine Capital Racing Association or PenMac, renewal of leases and land tenures, dismissal of MTI tickets, waiving of facility or program fees, grant and aid to sports groups when of urgent nature, and administrative policies. Some authority for land use issues has previously been delegated through the Land Use Procedures Bylaw. Options that Delegation of Authority Bylaw number 1292-2019 be forwarded to the next regular open meeting for consideration, or 2, that staff be directed to make changes and bring back the bylaw to the next committee of the whole meeting for further discussion, and staff recommend option 1.
Thank you very much. I'm going to ask Mr. Romanko to explain the part about expending funds over $30,000. It was a question that I had, and he said he would speak to that. Could you explain that a little further, please?
Okay, so there are two delegation recommendations speaking to the expenditure of funds over $30,000, and the first one is just 3 down. And in my current job description, there I have a $30,000 expenditure limit. This particular, I also have within my job description the authority to expend more than $30,000 in emergency situations. So, for example, in the floods last year, if there was a need to expend more than $30,000 to deal with that emergency, I had the authority to do that within my job description. However, it was not in bylaw. So that helps to provide more authority for the CAO in those particular situations. After that expenditure, I would come back to council and report and receive approval of those particular expenditures. The second area that addresses the $30,000 expenditure, again, relates specifically to the current expenditure limit of the CAO at $30,000. This draft bylaw was brought to the previous council, and I think this was probably the most controversial item in the bylaw. And so, what it does is allows the CAO to approve all contracts that are within the approved budget. So, for example, the budget, this current budget that's proposed, there is the expenditure of funds for the sewer lift station. I think it's probably $3.6 million. Council would approve the amount in the budget. We would go through the tendering process. The tenders would come in, and if the tenders were under $3.6 million, we would have the authority to approve the tenders based on it being the lowest tender. If we were in a position of wanting to accept a tender that is above the or is not the lowest tender, we would then bring that back to council. So it allows for the administration to make basically expenditures within the approved budget. And I guess from the CAO's perspective, contemporary local government has one of the biggest policy decisions that council makes is in fact approving the budget. After all, after that, it's up to the administration to implement that budget. So this particular item provides for that kind of an unlimited expenditure as long as it's approved by budget. If council is not prepared to move to this kind of unlimited expenditure, I would strongly recommend that council provide a significant amount of an operating amount to enable the administration to make expenditures without having to come back to council. I would recommend something in probably the $125,000 to $150,000 amount if it's been approved in budget. And we're, for example, we're hiring consultants. We go through all the purchasing policies, and we come up with requests for proposals. It's under budget. We select the consultants, and we move ahead based on the budget. So if there is no appetite for an unlimited expenditure amount, then I would ask for at least something in that $125,000 to $150,000 amount.
Thank you for explaining that. Councillor King?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I don't support this.
Jim, do you want to
need to use your...
I don't necessarily support this being open, but I could definitely make a motion to support up to $150,000.
With the rest of the things, okay. Councillor Bennett?
I'll second that.
You'll second that? Anyone else like to speak to that?
I guess the wording would have to be changed.
I'd like to speak to that if I could, please.
We knew you would. Councillor Rhodes, go ahead.
So we're doing a motion in our committee of the whole meeting. Could you clarify that for me, please?
I'll clarify that.
Yes, go ahead.
The motion would be to change the recommendation in the bylaw, which would then be brought to a regular council for debate. It's a matter of what is the general direction we're getting from council at this particular point in time to bring it for debate at council level.
Okay.
Thank you. I think I would speak against this motion. One of the things, being a councillor that's very, very important is when you engage with members of our community on budget items and similar things. And, having the interaction during this process that we're kind of talking about taking out of that process right now with this motion is something that I feel a little lonely being out there trying to talk to people about things, and that kind of situation kind of bothers me a little bit. When we go through the process of approving tenders and doing that kind of thing, that's very, very important for me to have that very contemporary information at hand. And somehow I feel like I'd be out of the loop a little bit with that kind of thing if we move forward with this. I would also like to comment on the part of it about the emergency and that part of it. I kind of like that a little bit. When we went through the flood situation last year and some of the other things in the past, having the CAO engaged in that process, not only with what he would do, he or she would do, it's also important to have the financial aspect of, as a valuable tool during that process. But yeah, I'm troubled about this. I like all of the other items in this proposal, but I'd have to speak against that motion in its entirety.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Rhodes. I would just like to say that in thinking about this as well, from my point of view, I could agree with it if it had already been accepted by in our budget, and anything outside of that I would absolutely have a concern about. But if we had agreed to it in our budget, I think I could go along with this. However, I will let Councillor King speak again.
Thank you. I don't know if Councillor Rhodes understands what I was trying to do. I don't like it either, Councillor Rhodes, the way it's written, but I'd like to give the staff the latitude to make decisions up to $150,000. And then if it goes over that, they definitely have to come to council.
I think Councillor Rhodes saw that in your first motion. Am I correct? Councillor Rhodes, did you catch that one?
Yeah, I definitely got the essence of it, and it's just I just don't feel comfortable with the change, as a whole, not just a certain aspect of it.
Okay.
I like the way it is right now. I feel comfortable with the process that we use right now, and I think the reason that I expressed is because it gives you contemporary, current information that's very valuable when you're dealing with members of the public, and I don't want to be taken out of that loop for any amount of money or any other kind of latitudes that motion might bring forward.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Harvey.
Yeah, generally I don't have an issue even as written, in that if we as council approve a budget for a project, which we do on a regular basis, that we trust staff to act accordingly. But I would like to see reporting regularly, like we get reporting on other things like building permits and things of that nature. I'd like to see an accounting of what's being spent under this authority, this delegated authority. So to me, this thing can't stand alone. It would have to go along with some kind of, and maybe it exists that I'm not aware of, some kind of reporting mechanism for those expenditures, so that we have the visibility that Councillor Rhodes is seeking, but we're not tying staff's hands unnecessarily with process, having to bring it to council all the time for approval.
Good, thank you. Mr. Emenko?
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. That's where I wanted to go, is that I can understand Council's concern relating to being kept in the loop relative to the activities, and again, we can build something into the bylaw that supports a reporting, whether it be in the CAO's report, which I provide at council meetings, any time that we have made an approval of a contract or a tender related to the budget, that would be included in the CAO's report.
Thank you. And I certainly take Councillor Rhodes' point carefully. We are oftentimes, council is usually the first ones that get asked by the public, what's going on, what are you doing, why did you do this? So you're quite right that we need to be definitely in the know about things. We don't want any surprises, because that does not reflect well on us. So it sounds to me like we have a couple of things that we might need to go ahead, Mr.
If I can make just one comment, I think the difference is decision making versus information, and Article 10 of the bylaw speaks to the delegates shall prepare regular reports to council on where they have exercised their delegation.
Absolutely, that's very important to look at. All right, so we do have a motion to look at this delegation of authority bylaw and change the amount. It's moved and seconded to $150,000 for equipment and services, and the recommendation is that this would then be brought forward to the next regular open meeting, or would we like to see these changes made first before we bring it forward?
I'd like to see the changes made. I'll be voting taking this out if this gets defeated.
So I'm a little bit concerned about where we're at the moment. Can you?
Right now, we have a motion on the floor, a resolution on the floor, and it's seconded as well,
Yes.
that that the council direct administration to change the recommended delegation of authority bylaw to authorize the expenditure of budgeted funds up to $150,000 and bring this draft bylaw forward to the regular council meeting.
Would that be today?
No, it wouldn't be today.
No, would be in the
No.
future. All right.
Yeah.
And that's been moved and seconded. We're okay with that? Councillor Harvey, did you want to speak to it before we vote?
Well, yeah, I'm going to speak against that limitation. I think, as I say, I think the budgeted amount is the budgeted amount. We've on any given issue, it's been in front of council, we've hashed it out, we've approved a budgeted amount for a project. I think the staff should be allowed to proceed. And with the reporting item that I missed, I think we should operate on that basis, and we shouldn't tie their hands with a $150,000 limit.
Okay, thank you. So we have a motion on the floor, and we're going to ask for a vote on that. All in favor of the motion? That's 1, 2, 3. Against?
I'm opposed.
Okay, so that is carried because it's a 3-2 vote. Thank you very much.
Okay, so just in summary, this
Yes.
delegation of authority bylaw will probably be brought to the next council meeting based on the $150,000 being placed in that particular
Section.
article or section, and then council will debate it, and we'll be looking for first 3 readings on the delegation bylaw.
Okay, thank you. Councillor King.
Yeah, I'd like to go down the list here. I just want clarity on the third one from the
Yep.
bottom. Grant and aid to sports groups when it is of urgent nature. I think that's a little vague, or can you?
Well, again,
I support. I just want.
yeah, no. Often we have within our grant and aid program, I think $2,000 for sport groups. For example, when a team wants to go to provincial hockey tournament, there's no council meeting, that the staff would be delegated authority to provide them the policy-driven $500 that is identified, and that because there's no council meeting.
That's fine.
But we've already agreed to the policy, and we know that there's money there, and that's what it's
Yes.
for. Okay.
And then what is the difference between application for funding and grant applications? The last two. Aren't they one and the same?
Could be.
Application for funding. I'm not
Well,
sure.
it could be. I'm just thinking out loud here relative to the grant and aid project, that we may have budgeted monies for grant and aid, and somebody comes forward with a project that needs funding, and the staff, because there's no council meeting, staff would make a decision on whether or not that particular application would be approved.
But this has nothing to do with grant and aid. This is just a group coming asking for some funding.
Well, we would have to.
See where pocket of money it comes
That's
out of.
right. Yeah.
It would have to be within the grant and aid budget to
And
allow
that's a
it.
good
Oh, yeah, no.
point. You know, we may want to clarify that
I think, yeah.
because we do have areas that council currently uses for funding our community development budget.
I support it. I just think you need clarity a little more there.
Okay.
Okay. Yes, Ms. Van Vienen.
One of the intentions of the applications for funding is for the victim services. Right now, when we have to apply each year for our funding for victim services program, we have to come to council with the funding application to get, it's not a grant, it's actually a funding application, and council has to approve it before we send it in. So I think that's where the difference comes in.
Okay.
The way we were just discussing
Yeah.
is though the public was coming to us for funding. You're talking about staff
That's right.
asking for
So
funding.
that's the two
So-
differences.
No, but it doesn't say
Yeah,
that.
we'll clarify.
Yeah, we'll
That's-
clear-
if you
and then-
clarify that, bring it
Yeah.
back.
Yeah, and I appreciate that because there are a number of grant applications
exactly.
that don't require a council resolution that we bring to council right now. And that's what it's intended to address. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you very much. So that one's dealt with. We're okay?
I got to ask one more question.
Okay.
We're live here. The last one, approval of administrative policies. Is that you just writing your own policy?
That's right, for the overall operations of the organization. So things like human resource policy.
So you write it and then it comes to us?
No.
No, it doesn't.
No, it's the operating policy would be done by the CEO.
Okay, then. If that's normal, that's fine.
Yeah, it is a contemporary operating policy that if you look at the job descriptions of most CAOs, they have the authority, again, to work with their management team to develop policies that are, for the betterment of the operation of the organization. And, currently we're looking at probably, we're looking at with the cannabis legislation, we're redoing our drug policy. All those policies would be the responsibility of the CEO and the management team.
But it would then be brought back to council?
No,
it wouldn't. It
no.
would be, okay. That, yeah.
So I guess that would just be in your report when some things are done. That would just be noted in your report.
It would be noted in the report that we've developed a new human resource policy or respect in the workplace policy. Many of our policies are human resource related.
Right. Okay.
Okay,
Yeah.
that makes
And then it's reported to us.
That's right.
That's what the policy is. Okay.
The only thing that we wouldn't be able to change is we wouldn't be able to change any type of service policy because council determines the level of service. So if we were going to change hours or things like that, for example, if we were going to change the hours of the Sonora Center, we wouldn't do that without council approval because it is in fact a service level policy.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. And we will go on to the, sorry, Councillor
we have to
King.
make a motion now to bring this?
No, we're
The
good.
motion has been,
Okay, we're good.
yeah.
Okay, thank you. We're down to the senior planner's report on Main Street Bollard installation. Thank you, Mr. MacArthur.
Thank you, Mayor McCorduff. So this report is in regards to installing bollards on the Main Street. Background. Completion of the bump outs on Main Street have two primary purposes of pedestrian safety and Main Street beautification. The installation of new bump outs caused the relocation of the vehicle stop lines to be and painting of new crosswalks to be moved forward. However, pedestrians have been crossing the street where the crosswalks were previously located. As the vehicle stop line has been moved forward, such jaywalking has caused a safety issue. In order to ensure pedestrian safety, the installation of bollards is needed to steer people towards the new crosswalks and prevent vehicular pedestrian collisions. The project will involve installation of bollards at the intersections of Main Street and 85th, 87th, and 89th Avenues. The bollards will enhance the downtown as one of the first Main Street beautification projects. Overview. Several British Columbia bollard manufacturers were contacted to identify potential suppliers, including Rayburn Erectors, Reliance Foundry, and Wishbone Site Furnishings. Based on their available inventories, several bollards were shortlisted for consideration. Criteria included price, design, LED lighting, and ease of installation. They were all used to narrow the list of options. Option A, the price of the Reliance R7576 bollard made it an attractive option. However, the design was determined to be too ornate and installation was not as straightforward as other options. Option B was the Wishbone Medina MB37. The sleek design and low price of the MB37 bollard were factors in its shortlisting. It was also determined to be easier to install than other options. And option C was the LED version of the MLB37. This bollard was shortlisted as it has an LED light, which was determined to be beneficial in adding additional safety for pedestrians. So selection, the chosen option is to install both the non-LED MB37 and LED version MLB37, alternating the LED and non-LED bollards. The LED bollards will provide added safety, while alternating them with the non-LED bollards will reduce the total cost. Black frames with wood tone trim will be used for the LED and non-LED bollards, similar to the figure shown in Figure 2. Installation of the bollards will be completed by operational services staff. Electrical work will be subcontracted. Operational services indicates that the installation of bollards at Main and 85th Avenue will be completed first, followed by Main and 87th, and then finally Main and 89th. The project is expected to be completed before this summer. Budget, the total cost of the project is expected to be $43,000, including purchase of bollards and installation. And the funds for that, the Resort Municipality Initiative provides funding for the town to spend on upgrades, including downtown revitalization projects. Funding for the bollards will be taken from this RMI budget. Options, this report is for information only.
Thank you very much. Councillor King?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. About how many bollards are on each bump out?
Yes, thank you. Through the chair, Councillor King, there are approximately 20 per intersection, so about 5 on each corner, but some don't require that many.
Okay, so it's a little flexible.
Yeah, between 3 and 5 roughly, but roughly 12 or 20 at each intersection.
And would it be kind of close enough so you couldn't put a buggy through it, so they have to walk around?
That's correct.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Go ahead, Councillor Rhodes.
Thank you. Yeah, way to go, Don. I really like this. These bollards are really kind of attractive, and they'll certainly improve the safety at every one of those intersections. And I'm just curious if any of them will be connected together and what kind of material we would use if they were.
Like chains, is that what you mean? That type of thing?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you.
exactly.
Through the chair. Thank you, Councillor Rhodes. At first, we anticipate not having chains attached, but they will be manufactured with eyelets, so that if in future we decide that chains would be a good idea, then those could be attached. But we're hoping that chains won't be required and that people will sort of move towards the crosswalks without having such a barrier.
Thank you. Councillor Harvey?
I mean, I know we talk about this at budget, but it seems to me people are people, and hurting them like cattle is folly, and we should move the stop lines back to where they were before.
Through the chair. Thank you, Councillor Harvey. The stop line was moved forward to make the intersections safer for drivers and also for pedestrians. So there's no thought to moving the stop lines back at this time. It would make it difficult for drivers to see around the corners if that was to occur.
I have a concern. The flashing lights over here on 87th, and I use that crosswalk quite often, I have to go and over to the pole, press the light to flash the lights, then walk back to have a look to make sure the lights are on before I cross. Has there been any thought to asking whether that the crosswalk was sort of put in there and those lights when the crosswalk was in a different position? And I'm thinking for safety reasons that maybe we should have a look at. Maybe it's Department of Highways that has to look at that. I'm not sure. Do you know?
We haven't addressed that issue with MOTI, but we can see if there's something that they'd be able to have something put on the crosswalk that acknowledges that the lights are in fact flashing.
Yes, because it is confusing, and you have to walk back and forth to get across there. That's what I've noticed. Ms. McKay?
Am I on? Am I on?
Yes.
Check. Thank you. Just to confirm, actually, as soon as you push that button, the light starts flashing. I know everyone goes out to check, but that is how they're set up. But we could look at maybe possibly, as the CEO points out,
I think I've seen in other communities where they have actually lights on top of
Exactly.
of the flashing lights, just to provide people that safe. I understand the need for comfort that in fact that the lights are in fact flashing.
Because just because the lights are on does not mean that every car stops. So that's part of the problem. So I go out there, I look both ways, I catch the eye of the drivers before I make my way across. So I understand. It's just a little bit confusing over there because things have changed a bit. Okay. Anything else? So thank you for bringing this. I think it looks good. Can I ask, is the plan to put some, in the summertime, some planters with flowers out there as well, or is that not part of this report?
Thank you, Mayor McCordov. There is an idea to plan the bump outs with planters and other street furniture, but that plan will be brought forward at a future date.
Okay, thank you. So next is the resolutions, SILGA resolutions.
I can speak to that.
Okay.
So Council's received notification from SILGA for their annual convention, seeking out if Council has any resolutions that they want to bring to the convention. The process for getting to UBCM resolutions includes a vetting through the local regional association. So if Council would like to have something put on the UBCM resolution agenda, they first have to identify that resolution and direction and take it to the floor of the SILGA convention. So this is the request for Council. If you have any resolutions that you would want to have addressed, we need time to write them up in the appropriate format.
Good, thank you. And I think we have about a month to do that.
That's
so
right.
We need to put on our thinking caps. I do know that the regional district meeting is also looking at these, and sometimes if we're very concerned about it, having a council resolution from the town of Vesuvius and a regional district resolution gives a little more oomph to the whatever it is that we think is important to bring forward. So all of council, we need to think about this, see if there's anything in particular that we want to. Councillor King, have you already thought of something?
Well, I just want to throw it out there. I guess it's just with the flooding and the water, and with these resolutions, they have to be a little more provincial-wide, is mine right? Not just sort of local town resolution.
They can be both. They can be a town concern, and if several towns or municipalities put forward a similar resolution, that gives a little more heft to it.
Yeah.
Okay? Are we all right with that? So we will be thinking about that one, and that's all that we have for today. So we will need a motion to close the meeting, please. Councillor King, Councillor Bennett, all in. Thank you. All in favor. Thank you very much, everyone.